The siren in Elena Morales's lab was not meant for her heart. She bent over the ruined scanner as if proximity could stitch sense into the static, fingers coated in a film of dust and old coffee, and the warning tone shredded the quiet she had cultivated like armor. The monitors blinked access violation in green that had once been blue, a camera feed from an orbital relay fritzing into a smear of stars, and behind it, impossible, intimate, the image of a man on her mattress, watching. He had folded himself into the shadow of her apartment like a memory that had learned to breathe. He was smiling as he watched her sleep, but the smile was wrong. It knew the trajectory of her nightmares. Wait, before the next revelation unfolds. If this story has already captured your heart, let us know where you're following from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected twists, emotional reconciliations, or new beginnings, subscribe and stay connected. Now back to the story. Cairo did not look like the stories in brittle debriefs. He was neither monstrous nor celestial marble. He carried the hush of someone who had crossed oceans of cold before becoming human warmth. His skin held a faint iridescence when he turned, like oil on water. And his eyes, too many agents had used otherworldly as a euphemism, were a deep, unguarded gray that made Elena uncomfortably visible. He lifted a hand, palms open, in a universal gesture that had been taught to diplomats centuries ago. "You know the feed shouldn't have reached that relay," he said. His voice was modulated, practiced to be steady. "I saw your dreams anyway." She should have called security. She should have sealed the lab, shouldered the weight of protocols that had kept her name useful in a world that liked heroes scrubbed of sentiment. Instead, she asked the most dangerous question first. "Why are you in my apartment?" Cairo's smile softened into something like apology. "Because the coalition learned faster than your satellites. I watched you sleep to catalog the colors of your nightmares. To be truthful, the coalition watched too. They thought your species needed containment. I thought—" He hesitated, and in that pause Elena saw calculation and something like hunger. "That you might be one of the few who remembered enough to make the right kind of trouble." The lab smelled like ozone and old rain. Elena had memorized the agency's maps the way lovers memorize each other's faces. The shaded areas, the red marks, the 10 blank sanctified swaths labeled inviolable that had haunted her dreams for years. She had drawn them, traced them with the steady hand of someone who believed order could hold terror at bay. 10 places the coalition and every government with a stake in power had conspired to hide from its citizens. She had been the architect of the secrecy, the woman who smoothed the edges of panic into policy. Yet here was a being who looked at her with the same kind of pity she had once reserved for dying patients. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, because anger was safer than the tremor in her throat. "You're not supposed to have our feeds." "I am not supposed to be anywhere on your world," Kairos admitted. "I am supposed to be a delegate with a badge and a report and a name on a ship. I am not supposed to risk exile for this conversation." He chose his words with the care of someone building a bridge out of words people might fall through. "But the coalition sealed 10 places on this planet long before your maps. We left scars there. We marked them with wards that even your brightest satellites could not penetrate without permission. Those wards are failing." Elena laughed once, short, brittle. "Do you expect me to believe an envoy who watches my sleep feeds because he thinks my nightmares are a data sample? Do you expect me to expect anything from you at all?" He looked at her like a scientist looking at a specimen that had puzzled him into tenderness. "You want answers. You have an agency who will tell you nothing. I have 10 sites to explain, and not much time." Her loyalty had been a professional trait, a muscle shed, trained until it clenched reflexively. For 12 years, Shed signed off on memos that turned disasters into classified incidents and into policy. For 12 years, Shed cloaked grief and monstrous evidence in careful language. Containment protocol, neutralization, quarantine. The maps she'd helped craft were a kind of prayer to keep panic away. Yet that morning, with the alarm screaming and the image of a stranger in her bed still crawling across the back of her throat, she understood how fragile the prayers had been. Why me? The question stripped its politeness down to the bone. Why risk exile? Why lie and watch me sleep? Cairo's hand brushed against a console like one might steady a trembling child. Because someone who knows how to read fear will see that fear as a doorway, he said. You have seen things. You have fallen asleep with 10 names on your tongue. You signed away your right to speak, but you never let the names go. You are dangerous because you remember. A memory dripped into Elena, cold tile and the smell of antiseptic. A hand that was not hers curled protectively over a belly that had been emptied of something fragile and alien in a clinic painted white with governmental surety. She had given up a pregnancy that had not been explained properly. She thought she had steeled herself against the empty space it left. The agency had told her it was for science, for the greater good. The file had been buried in redacted layers of evidence. But the absence had never become absence. It had become a hole she wore like a locket at her throat. You know about the clinic, she said, each syllable a test. I know many things your records do not permit. Kairos's face was lit by the console light in a way that made him look younger and more dangerous. I know a coalition that signed treaties and forgot the cost. I know an exile who prefers truth to peace, and I know 10 places that cannot stand guardianship from shadows. Elena's first impulse was disgust. She had spent a career in the cold rooms of secrets, in the hush between top-tier briefings and midnight watch shifts where her colleagues traded conspiracy like a card game. To invite an extraterrestrial into that web, alien, exile, unregulated, felt like a betrayal of the only language she had perfected, authority. Yet as she looked at him, she felt something else flowering, an old hunger for clarity she had numbed with administrative rhetoric. Suppose I believe you, she said. Suppose you break protocol, break exile, and stand here with me. You tell me about each of the 10. What do you get? Cairo's smile widened, not triumphant, but rueful. What I get is trust. Perhaps a recorder that will survive the coalition's purges. Perhaps a witness who will carry truth into your networks when I cannot. Perhaps, he tilted his head, and something like hope touched his words. Someone who will not let my people hide our shame in silence. A distant memory of a child's laugh. No, a recording of something like laughter and scales flashed in his eyes, and Elena realized with an electric shock that he had watched not only her sleep, but the small secret parts of her life she had never published. He had cataloged her vulnerability the way a curator cataloged relics, with reverence and the quiet cruelty of necessity. Her phone vibrated against a stack of papers, a reminder that the agency existed in the room like a patient that had not yet been wheeled away. Director Alvarez had texted earlier, "Stay on mission. We trust your judgment." The phrase had always sounded paternalistic to Elena, threaded with possessiveness like a man who loved a tool more than the tool's maker. The agency loved Elena the way owners loved well-trained dogs, for obedience and utility. Kairos reached toward her, and for a jittering second she read the gesture as an offer to steady. Instead, he placed a slim, luminescent object on the counter between them, a disc no larger than a coin, its surface a map of concentric rings that shifted like breath. It hummed softly, a frequency that seemed to warm the room. "This is a key," he said, "not to doors in the way your maps suggest, but to the memory of the places. It will let you see what we saw. It will let you understand why the coalition marked them inviolable. Seeds of betrayal and wonder wrestled in Elena. The agency drilled rules into her at enrollments and briefings. No contact, no undocumented exchanges, no unvetted information. Touching alien tech was a category that earned you silent exile or worse. But the coin called to her as if it had always been part of the artery under her breast. She imagined feeding it into the lab's reader, opening windows into cavities of the world that had been closed off to everyone who had once trusted her. "What do you want in return?" she asked, because people always wanted something. Cairo softened. "Truth," he said. "Not the kind that becomes propaganda, but the kind that will not be buried after discovery. I ask for you to go with me through the 10, to see them, to corroborate, to carry what you learn to a place that will keep it from being sanitized. You will be risking more than your position, Elena Morales. You will be risking your memory, perhaps. The coalition has ways of erasing, of sanitizing histories to save species. I cannot promise you will keep everything you learn. I can promise you will remember the way this feels." He tapped his chest then, where his ribs rose and fell under iridescent skin. It was an intimacy, half greeting, half confession, that made the laboratory spin a fraction. Elena's career had been built on measurable variables and controlled environments. Cairo's proposition was neither. It was a plunge. Her rational mind offered alternatives in a drip: report him, detain him, blackmail him for proof. But the rational mind had been exhausted by years of sanctioned silence. Her nightmares had been patient teachers, showing her the 10 smudges on maps like empty wombs, the locations that hummed with a threat she could not name. She had thought the agency's blank spaces were defense. Now they felt like a lie. She tested the coin between her fingers, the hum painting her fingertips with a sensation like static on skin. "If I agree," she said finally, "we do this my way. We record everything. We follow strict protocol. No touching anything alive without containment. We take samples. We rotate watchers. We do not hand your reports to those who would bury them under the director's desk," Cairo finished. "We deliver them to a network of people who will not consign history to silence." Something inside her, call it anger, or perhaps a desperate streak of what had once been idealism, answered. The agency had taught her to control the narrative. Maybe it was time she changed the story the agency wanted to keep. Outside, a weather alert licked the window panes, turning distant traffic lights into little constellations. Elena felt the world as an apparatus held together by thin, apologetic screws. The coin hummed, and the man who had watched her sleep watched her now, with an intensity that seemed to strip the world of its polite veneers. She wondered, with a sudden sharp clarity, how many times in history 2 beings standing on the edge of catastrophe had found trouble disguised as desire. "One condition," she said, folding policy into defiance. "If I go with you, I choose every next step. Not you, not the coalition, not the director. I choose." Cairo's eyes softened to something that might be acceptance or might be calculation. "You will choose," he said. "And if you choose to walk away, you will become a living anomaly inside your own mind, full of things you can no longer name." Unauthorized downlink attempt. Elena's hands tightened on the coin. The night had closed in. Whatever thin shield the agency had mounted around the planet was learning that the wards it set were not enough. In that narrowing space, between siren and silence, between a man who risked exile and a woman who had spent a lifetime sealing truths, Elena Morales made the first reckless decision of her life. She pocketed the key, turned off the lab's external alarms, and opened a file she had never meant to read until the world forced her hands. The file's title was a single, terrible phrase: 10 doors. Elena opened 10 doors like a wound she had been trained to stitch and refused to dress. The file unfolded in her hands, not as neat paragraphs, but as shocks. Archived footage with its edges blurred, transcripts with whole lines redacted, schematic sketches that suggested non-Euclidean spaces, and the polite cruelty of bureaucrats who had learned to pray with their pens. For a minute she simply read, finger tracing the words as if they might bleed fact instead of ink. Cairo watched her the way someone watches a fragile instrument being recalibrated. When she reached a diagram of the first site, a coastal archipelago off the southern tip of a continent, a place marked by fishermen's vanishing tales and official amnesia, his breathing softened. "You want to see?" he asked. Elena had imagined the 10 as a list to be catalogued, then neutralized. She had not imagined them as places of grief. The images that Cairo unlocked were not monstrous at first, they were intimate. A cove with stone that sang when the tide retreated, a lighthouse with glass that drained the color from the sky, a field where grass grew in patterns like script. The footage, however, always ended the same way, with people looking at something that made their faces rearrange into reverence and terror simultaneously. Then blankness. Then containment teams marked with agency insignia sweeping in and vanishing the survivors into black sedans and deeper silence. "Why did we seal them?" she whispered. Cairo's hand hovered over the coin, as if the object shared in the guilt. "We sealed them to stop contagion, not of disease, but of memory. The places do not take bodies as you would imagine, they take histories. They make people remember things that cannot be held in a single mind without it breaking. Our species, my people, discovered that a long time ago on another world. You cannot coexist with a truth that was not prepared to be known. So we buried the 10, as we buried our own shame." Elena's throat tightened. She had never thought of stories as contagions. To her, they were anchors. She had never seen memory weaponized into something that could fracture a society. It explained sudden, reverberant wars on minor islands, whole generations of fishermen who could not name their summers, infants born in silence with eyes that never learned to laugh. Then blankness. Then containment teams marked with agency insignia sweeping in and vanishing the survivors into black sedans and deeper silence. "Why did we seal them?" she whispered. Cairo's hand hovered over the coin, as if the object shared in the guilt. "We sealed them to stop contagion, not of disease, but of memory. The places do not take bodies as you would imagine, they take histories. They make people remember things that cannot be held in a single mind without it breaking. Our species, my people, discovered that a long time ago on another world. You cannot coexist with a truth that was not prepared to be known. So we buried the 10, as we buried our own shame." Elena's throat tightened. She had never thought of stories as contagions. To her, they were anchors. She had never seen memory weaponized into something that could fracture a society. It explained sudden, reverberant wars on minor islands, whole generations of fishermen who could not name their summers, infants born in silence with eyes that never learned to laugh. It explained the clinics, sterile white, and the way the agency had kept certain women on light rations, certain men on sedatives. Memory, it turned out, could be an infection of empathy so powerful it unstitched civilizations. "How did you find me?" she asked, the planogenic edge of fury sharpening her voice. "Why watch a woman who'd already been taken apart by your kind?" "Because you were angry enough to be useful," Cairo said simply. "Anger keeps memory intact. It resists the smoothing that institutions do. You signed the 10 away because you thought it was safer. But you never stopped feeling the absence. You never allowed them to neuter the questions inside you." She wanted to tell him that she had felt less anger than fatigue, that the agency had a way of converting outrage into mission. Instead, she asked about the coin. "What does it do to me?" "It lets you resonate," he said. "It will show you impressions the way a seismograph shows earthquakes. It will not give you full sight of the things themselves. That requires proximity. But it will mean you can stand the first sight without your mind unraveling. And the cost? She asked, stingy with hope. Cairo's face shifted. Memory scaffolds can be built and then taken down. There is a risk of forgetting in pieces, names, smells, a hand held in panic. There is also the possibility that what you learn will root itself so thoroughly that the agency cannot retake it by erasure. To be honest, I do not know which will happen if you let it bind to you. That is why I need a witness who understands what files mean. Elena imagined herself returning to the agency with 10 hands of evidence and a head full of fissures. She imagined Director Alvarez leaning across a desk with that protective possessiveness and telling her that memory could be reclassified, sanitized, made into a report with bullet points and policy responses. She imagined him saying, gently, "You are safe within the archive." He loved her intellect the way a man loves power, devoutly and territorially. Love made him a threat in its own way. "Fine," she said at last. "We go to the first location. We take the minimal team. No one else knows. We rotate watchers. We gather material evidence. And we record every step." Kairos nodded, but his eyes registered a separate question. She was bargaining out of a professional place, not from the space that really mattered. And you will let me see you at your most candid," he said. "You will let me see what your body does when the memory touches it." Her body reacted before her mind could consent. It shivered, a physical answer to being looked at like a map of faults. Kairos' gaze was not hungry in the way the agency men had been. It was investigative and full of a tenderness that terrified her because it suggested he knew how to heal what had been taken. She folded the coin into a pocket and let them plan. A small aircraft, a decoy flight manifest that placed the team on a different continent, anonymized surgical kits, sample storage, and a burner phone that would be their only lifeline. They left at dawn 2 days later, under bleached clouds and the wrong names on their badges. The first sight rose out of a sea that smelt of iron and cedar, beautiful, sorrowful, slightly off. The island's outline resembled a hand making a small, secret gesture. Waves hit the rocks in a rhythm so regular it felt composed. On the sand, they found the usual aftermath: footprints that led to nowhere, jeweled shells arranged in patterns, and dried salt stains on rocks like tear tracks. Cairo held Elena's hand as they walked toward a cliff where a group of scrubby trees clustered like congregants. The gesture astonished her with its ordinariness. No diplomacy courses prepared you for the intimacy of fingers in the damp wind. She felt as exposed as a fetus and as armored as a suit simultaneously. "Listen," Cairo said softly. She did. The sound that rose from the rocks was not a song, but a language of pressure shifts, a hum that arranged itself into syllables her throat wanted to learn. For a moment, she felt as if the entire island was leaning in to whisper secrets, names of things she had been taught to forget, the flavor of sunlight on another shore, the face of a mother who had once tried to teach her child what history was. The sensation was not only auditory, it landed in her chest and spread like frost along a window pane, eating at the annotations she had kept tidy in her mind. Cairo's grip tightened. "Anchor," he said, pressing the coin to the hollow of her palm, where skin met bone. "Breathe into it." The coin thrummed once, and the hum and the island coalesced into a filament she could bear. Images came, an ache like the kind she had felt in the clinic, the burning of hands when someone tried to pull ink out of a throat, a child who knew too many adult names. The images stacked and started to tessellate into a story that was not hers, and then, horrifically, felt as if it had always been waiting inside her. "Remind me who I am," she whispered, because the island made personhood slippery. "You are Elena Morales," Cairo answered, as if he needed to anchor her to the world he had learned from watching her sleep. You are a scientist and a witness. You are someone who keeps lists. And outside of that, you are mine to befriend only if you let me, and I am an exile named Cairo." The word mine struck and peeled at places she had locked away. It felt like a promise and a claim. The coin warmed more. The island's memory folded into hers like a lover sliding into place. And for a few long seconds, Elena forgot the agency, Director Alvarez, and the sterile bed of the clinic. She saw instead a woman in a rowboat naming the dead to keep them alive. A small town where the children all once sang the same breaking song. An altar where people left the shells of their old lives like offerings. Then a sound snapped the horizon, a chorded, deliberate crack that was not natural. A helicopter's shadow cut over the water. The decoy manifest was wrong. Someone had traced them. A voice on Cairo's earpiece hissed, "Compromise detected. Get out." Adrenaline scalded Elena. She had expected danger. She had not expected the agency, or someone that moved like it, to arrive with the polite swiftness of a guillotine. She felt suddenly naked, not in body, but in the bareness of knowledge. That the 10 were guarded not just by interstellar treaties, but by humans who wanted history erased as much as aliens did. She remembered the sterile rooms. She remembered that she had been useful to a system that would cut out inconvenient organs. Kairos moved first, a blur of decisive motions. He pulled her down a narrow trench as men in dark armor fanned out across the cliff, rifles swinging with clinical intent. Elena's rational mind sprinted. They were outmanned, outarmed, far from reinforcements. Her hands searched for instruments, for lines of protocol that would give the situation sense. Instead, she found only the small, raw truth that separated her from the agency. The agency would erase you to maintain order. Cairo, for all his exile and his people's sins, was here to preserve what the agency wanted gone. "Run to the cove," he whispered, "urgent now. The memory will hide you if we give it sound. Don't let them take you." But they did not need to take her. A dart clipped the back of her neck with surgical economy. Her vision smeared, as if someone had spilled quicksilver across the world. The last thing she saw before the ground slipped away was Cairo's face. Half determined, half fractured, reaching for her, eyes wide with a plea she could not yet name. "Remember me." When she woke, the world smelled of antiseptic and ozone. She was strapped to a gurney, bandage across her temple, the coin gone from her pocket. Her memory felt like a room someone had stripped while she slept. Vestiges remained, a song, a touch, the fact of a man who watched her sleep. But the interiors were empty, commendably clean. Panic rose, hot and furious. She had been erased of something, a night, a confession, a small intimacy that would not be found in mission reports. Cairo was not beside her when she came to. The only proof he had been there was a smear of iridescent scale at the edge of the gurney, and a voice in her head, a memory fragment of a phrase he had used. "You will remember the way this feels." She did remember the way it felt to be held at the brink of understanding and then pulled back. And fury folded itself into that remembrance like iron into steel. A recorded message blinked on the wall screen. Director Alvarez's face filled the room with paternal calm. "Elena," he said, "you had a reaction. Standard downlink sedation. You did well. We are proud of your restraint." Elena searched his face for something that was not ownership. She found among his practiced lines the cold edge of calculation. He had known. He had sent men, or they had been watching. The agency had not intervened to protect her. It had intervened to sanitize the scene. The director's words were a velvet glove over a fist. "What did you do to me?" she asked, her voice a hard instrument. He smiled, the smile of a man comforting a broken instrument. "We stabilized you. We cannot have our operatives running unauthorized expeditions. You know the 10 exist, and you had a minor exposure to one. It's not the first time. We had to ensure you remained functional." Functionality, Elena now understood, was the only metric that mattered. Operational stability over truth, obedience over history. She tasted bile. She thought of the clinic, of other women's blank faces, of the child that had been taken from her without consent. She thought of Cairo, of the way his hand had felt in hers, and of the coin that hummed like a heartbeat she could not find. She had to decide what to do with a knowledge half-remembered and a rage that had teeth. She could return to the agency and watch the 10 be hermetically sealed. Let the director's tidy compassion carve her into a useful object. Or she could find Cairo again, find the coin, and risk a memory that might cost her everything, including the memory of the man who had shown her what those 10 places did to people. Director Alvarez's last words echoed with uncanny tenderness. "We will protect you, Elena. We will keep you safe." Safe, she realized, meant small. It meant being kept away from the very things that had once made her alive. She breathed in the antiseptic, tasted the flavor of compromise, and felt a current of recklessness that had nothing to do with agency briefings. She would not, could not, go back to being sheltered in silence, not after feeling a world press its mouth to her and whisper a truth she had been taught to bury. Her hand flexed on the sheet. Somewhere outside, the island murmured in a language she could no longer fully hold. The memory was gone in parts, but the ache remained. A map without labels, a city without names, a person whose face belonged to the missing pieces. She would find Cairo. She would find the coin. She would decide, in her own terms, whether to keep what she might lose. The choice was violent and pure: to preserve her usefulness to an agency that loved her as a tidy asset, or to risk being unmade in order to undo a history that had been concealed under 1,000 classified stamps. Director Alvarez's smile on the monitor became a cliff she was prepared to leap from. She closed her eyes and listened for the echo of a hand on the mattress where she had once found a stranger watching her sleep. In the empty sound, she could almost feel fingers. She wanted them to be Kairos. She wanted him to be the constant toward which her loose, fractured memories might re-anchor. A nurse came in with a clipboard. "You had a reaction," she said, voice flat with trained concern. "Do you remember everything?" Elena stared at the woman, at the sterile fluorescent light, at the world arranged into places labeled safe. She said, slowly, "I remember enough." It was not a defiance yet. It was a promise. And beneath that promise, a more dangerous thing was rising. The knowledge that memory could be shared like contraband, smuggled out of white rooms and into the hands of those who would not bury it. Cairo had been wrong about one thing. She did not only remember to make trouble. She remembered because someone had once cut something from her, and she had learned to trace the scar with her mind until it became a map. Outside, the tide was turning. Elena sat up, the bandage at her temple crackling. And for the first time since the siren had shredded her quiet, she understood the shape of her next action. She would leave the hospital. She would find the exile who had taught her how fear could become a doorway. And she would walk into the second site with her eyes open, even if it meant losing them. The coin had hummed a promise into her palm. Remember the way this feels. Now, with the taste of antiseptic on her lips and the director's smile carved into memory like a fossil, she chose to honor that tiny, dangerous promise. The hospital window showed nothing but a gray that made the sky look like an accusation. Elena watched it until her wrists ached from holding the sheet, until the antiseptic smell in the room turned into the memory of a different smell. The sea on the island, iron and cedar. And she knew the ache was not only for a place, but for a person she could no longer name in full. She dressed in clothes she had packed before being sedated, a worn sweater, boots that had seen too many research sites, a scarf that smelled faintly of Cairo, oil sheen and cold dust from the corner where she'd tucked it after their hurried retreat. It was a theft of memory to cling to the scent, she told herself. Yet scent is a treacherous archivist. It held more fidelity than the files Director Alvarez could decree erased. It cued a face, a hand, a voice that had told her to anchor herself to a coin that had vanished from her pocket. When she walked out of the hospital, she felt like a woman stepping through a sideways time. Everyone moved in efficient arcs of obligation, while she carried a private catastrophe behind her eyes. Director Alvarez met her in the parking lot beneath a tree that had been spared the agency's preference for lacquered conformity. He smiled the way men smile when they are certain they have not yet lost something precious. His hands were open as if to show he bore no weapon. "Elena," he said, as though offering both greeting and absolution. "We're glad you're stable." She looked at him like a patient examines a surgeon, close enough to see the expertise, too close to ignore the tremor of possessiveness. "Why did you sedate me?" she asked. The question was quiet, but edged with a long, slow heat. He inclined his head, the practiced grace of a man who had learned to make compassion sound like command. "Standard protocol. Exposure to the first sight has measurable cognitive consequences. We could not risk you becoming a liability." "And you are not a liability?" she said. Her voice did not break, it coiled, ready to strike. "You sent men in the night." His smile didn't falter. "We sent a retrieval to prevent uncontrolled contamination. We have protocols, Elena. You're a senior asset. You were compromised." Compromised. The word had the sound of a verdict. Elena felt it like a hand on her throat. Her hands fisted. Compromised by whom? He studied her as if deciding what truth she could hold. "We detected an unauthorized downlink. We traced it to a civilian harbor within your operational window. Someone was watching your feed. You were observed outside secure parameters." "That someone was an exile," she said. The word left her before she could measure its reverberations. Cairo. Alvarez's face did not change as much as a pebble might in a stream. An exile, a known variable. "A known variable who watched me sleep," she said. "An exile who put a coin in my hand. An exile who showed me." She stopped, because the memory resisted being put into language without the coin's hum. Without it, the story risked becoming an outline, clean and easily filed away. Alvarez's gaze softened into something that felt like a trap set in velvet. "We cannot allow rogue interactants to upset the balance, Elena. You know what your position means. We protect humanity by limiting exposure. The coalition agreed to certain seals. You participated in those agreements." "You took my child," she said, the sentence sudden and volcanic. It had been a lead weight beneath her speech for years. Not exactly a secret, but never given air. The hospital seemed to inhale with her. Alvarez's jaw tightened imperceptibly. That procedure was lawful, now and then. "You volunteered for research." "I never volunteered for that," she cut him off. "You told me anesthesia would be local. You told me it was for my health. You obscured the word harvest with better uniforms and softer lights." The words fell like stones between them. Men nearby glanced away. Their faces were the practiced masks of operatives who had looked without being seen. Alvarez's mouth turned briefly into something like regret. There are things you must understand. The clinic was part of a containment program. Certain hybridizations. Don't, she said. Don't you dare. His hands went out then, the gesture of a man who once held her hand through a groggy debrief, and a gesture that now felt like condescension. We did that to make sure. To make sure what? Her voice was a blade. That you had leverage? That you could build weapons out of grief? You called it containment, Alvarez, and you taught me to call it duty. He looked wounded, as if she had named a betrayal that required his suffering to make it real. We did what we had to do, Elena. My first responsibility is the safety of humankind. She saw the truth then, a truth that had always hovered behind his paternal protectiveness. He loved the agency the way a zealot loves doctrine. Her own allegiance had been a scaffold that could be repurposed to hold his architecture. You love your institution more than you love me, she said. You think of me as a ledger. You are essential, he insisted, which is why we kept you close. Essential? Ledger? Words clashed and sparked and became something that could not be fixed with policy or apology. Elena had once believed that institutions could be instruments of good. Standing with Alvarez beneath the tree that afternoon, she felt those instruments' edges, sharp, metallic, designed to cut. When Alvarez left, with a promise of further protective measures, Elena felt both relieved and violated. Protective measures would mean surveillance, isolation, the comfort of control in exchange for the annihilation of all that Cairo had shown her. If she accepted, she could be useful forever. If she refused, she would be marked as someone who had the potential to reveal the seams of a world. The phone she had kept hidden in her boot vibrated with a contact only one other person in the agency knew. Maya Cortez, her field tech for years, someone who could fit into shadows and fold them like origami. Elena had trusted Maya the way childhood friends trust each other's secrets, the trust of shared schematics and midnight coffees at the lab. Her heart jolted with hope. Maya's text read, "Meet me, 22nd Street, 2 hours." Elena went. The city had the wet smell of someone who hadn't yet decided to forget the rain. 2 hours felt like a lifetime and a betrayal, a promise and a test. When Elena slid open the cafe door and saw Maya, her relief melted into something like a blade. Maya's face was pale, more severe than the last time they'd shared a cup of burnt agency coffee. "You're alive," Maya said, before the barista finished the greeting. "I was sedated," Elena said, "by Alvarez." You were processed," Maya corrected. "Look, I don't have long. Sit." They sat like conspirators at a table that had seen better secrets. Maya's eyes were ringed with a midnight that might have been sleeplessness or the ache of being complicit. "They put a tracer on you," Maya whispered. "When you walked out of the hospital, you were bugged." She produced a thin device with a practiced flick. "I took it out while they were moving your car. You need to leave." Relief hit Elena like cold water. "Where's Cairo?" she asked, wanting the world to be whole again. Maya's face flinched. "There are rumors," she said. "I overheard something on a channel I shouldn't have been on." "There are factions within the coalition. Some want to purge." "Purges?" Elena's hand tightened around her cup until it cracked. Maya nodded like someone watching a slow, brutal play. "Yeah, purge, wipe, wake up a generation with curated amnesia. I heard a name, the Colors. They think some histories are too dangerous. They also talk about weaponizing memory. They think hybrids are an infection." The word landed between them like an accusation. Elena felt the memory of the clinic pull at her like a tide. The Colors, if they existed, were a faction of Cairo's people who saw humanity as salvageable only by pain. The revelation was a jagged thing. If Cairo had ties to them, what had his intentions been when he watched her sleep? Had his tender promises been strategies? Or had her longing and his exile spun something neither of them fully intended? Maya's hand clenched. There's more. Alvarez knows more than he admits. He met with a representative from the coalition about countermeasures. They argued protocol. He argued opportunity. Opportunity? Elena's laugh was brittle. What opportunity? To control who remembers? Maya's eyes filled. Helena, I don't want to believe Cairo is... She stopped. The sentence shredded into pieces. Her throat worked. But there are traces. You were never the only one who woke up with a memory like a missing tooth. There are women, she swallowed, who disappeared after getting similar exposure. He said they were unstable. Alvarez, he said he could stabilize them. Elena's world narrowed. The news was a series of small, lethal explosions. Alvarez had been sanctifying his control under the guise of safety. The agency's sterilization had a face and a file with his initials. Maya reached across the table and squeezed her hand. The gesture was an attempt at refuge. "Do you trust me?" Maya asked. This was the question that had always been the spine of their relationship. Elena thought of all the nights they'd cut sample reports in two to hide scraps of truth. She had loved Maya as a comrade. Trust felt like a fragile apparatus of their old life. "I think I have to," she said finally. "But if you betray me..." "I won't," Maya said fiercely. "I was part of the line that took those samples. I can get you into the archives, Elena. There are logs, names. You can see which clinic handled what. You can see if Cairo's people were ever in contact with us. We can prove it." Elena wanted to hope. She wanted to believe the map would be born whole and their hands would trace it together. But there was a small, ruthless voice inside her, one she had learned to listen to in 1,000 briefings, that whispered of betrayal lying in wait. Cairo's exile had been a gray shape. Factions within his people could turn his kindness into a lever. Alvarez's protection could be a muzzle. Maya's help could be the finest kind of knife, the one put in with love. She met Maya's eyes and found an ocean of guilt and a strand of command. "We go tonight," she said. They moved in the precise choreography of two people who had once broken into labs to save each other from ignorance. Maya navigated back doors with a grace that made Elena think of old, dangerous dances. The archives smelled of cold air and cleaned paper, the kind of smell that makes people think knowledge equals purity. Elena watched as the rows of files passed like bones. Inside them, she expected to find the skeleton of a world she had helped stitch. They found names, clinic codes, shipment logs, patients with numbers instead of names. And then, like a meteor through night sky, something that made both their hands go cold. A list of transfers with timestamps that overlapped with Cairo's presence in a series of ports. The notation read, in bureaucratic monotone, "Alien contact, subject harvested, allowed per directive." A directive with Alvarez's signature blocked the page. Elena's fingers went numb. The evidence was wind and water, proof that someone in her agency had authorized the removal of children from hybrid gestations, proof that the coalition had the reach to request such things, and proof written in the very ink she had once used to certify safer methodology. "This is it," Maya breathed. "This is the anchor." Elena wanted to feel salvation. Instead, she felt her heart split open with two muzzles, one pointing at Alvarez, the man who had loved her as possession, the other pointing at Cairo, the exile who had whispered tenderness and shown her an impossible island. Between them was a chasm of moral calculus. Expose everything and risk a war between species, or crumble under a comfortable lie that kept millions safe. She thought of the women who had lain in antiseptic rooms and never been given names. She thought of her own ache, sharpened by a stolen pregnancy and a coin that lit a memory just long enough to taste it. The pages in front of her were fire. The choice was to throw them into the world and see the conflagration, or to smother them and let the ash settle in silence. Maya leaned in close and whispered, "There are also mentions of memory culling in the coalition logs. They were experimenting with targeted amnesia, selective wipes tied to biological vectors. They may have given you something." Elena swallowed. The idea that what had been taken from her might be tied to a technology meant to erase entire categories of pain made the world tilt. Whoever held that technology could redefine history. Outside the archive, a guard's footsteps matched the beat of her blood. A rushed page flicked across the screen as if forecasted. Someone was coming. The sound of a door opening on the other side of the building made their skin prickle. "We have to go," Maya said. They made it to the alley and then to the car with the ease of two people who had practiced escape in case of moral emergency. Elena's hands trembled on the wheel. The city lights seemed suddenly complicit, blinking in patterns she could no longer parse into code. As they drove, Elena looked at Maya, at the exhaustion behind her eyes and the raw courage of someone who had just defied an institution. "If we expose this," she said, voice small, "what will happen to Cairo, to the people on the islands?" Maya didn't answer immediately. When she did, it was with the sort of ferocity that comes when a person has been pushed to the edge of everything they love. "We don't know, but we can't let them keep making monsters out of people who don't know they're monsters yet. We don't get to decide for them." Elena let her breath leave her like a confession. They had no plan for the fallout, only a desperate permission to act. That permission felt like an inheritance and an indictment. In the rearview mirror, the city's light smeared into a smear of possible futures, some luminous, some as dark as the 10 doors themselves. The first fracture had already occurred, the one between Elena and the agency, between her and the safe, small life Alvarez offered. Now, deeper fissures waited, between her and Cairo, between love and the calculus of species survival. She had stolen some proof from the archive, a handful of logs and a cache of names. It wasn't everything. It wouldn't stop the colors, if they existed in the elegant way Maya's terror suggested. But it was a start. Outside the car, the world went on in all its human ways. A child laughed, a couple argued, a dog barked at shadows. Elena's chest ached with the taste of it. All the ordinary things that could be lost if someone decided history was too dangerous to remain whole. She thought of the coin, of its hum against her skin, of the way it had made the island's memory fold into her. She thought of Cairo's face when the dart hit her, the plea in his eyes. Had he been trying to save her or to enlist her into a plan that would cost too many lives? The question was a fracture of its own. And for the first time since the siren had shredded her armor, Elena allowed herself to wonder whether love could survive the truth of mutual culpability. The car turned onto a quieter lane. In the back of her mind, the island hummed like a distant instrument. Elena's hands tightened on the wheel until her knuckles shone white. Her reflection in the rearview was a stranger. Eyes too old for her years, a mouth set with a resolution that surprised her. "We expose this," she said at last, voice steadier than she felt. "We tell the story on our terms. We find Cairo, and if he is not what we hoped, then we hold him accountable. But we do not let them catalog memory into inventory without consent." Maya exhaled. "Then we become enemies of the agency." Elena's laugh was small and unbelieving. Better enemies than accomplices. Between them lay the rest of the night, the map of 10 doors, and the knowledge that every choice would splinter someone. But for the first time since she had woken shackled to a sanitized bed, Elena felt she was acting from a place that could not be filed away. If the agency would mark her as liability, she would be one that wouldn't be easy to erase. They drove into the dark like fugitives bearing truth. In Elena's pocket, hidden where the coin had been, her fingers found a small, irregular scar, the place where a memory had been taken. It ached, a compass for the work ahead. She closed her hand around it like a vow. She would remember enough to destroy the lie. Outside, somewhere beyond the city's glow, the 10 doors waited, humming like promises or traps. Between the agency's orders and the coalition's secrets, Elena felt the thin gearing of a dangerous love unspool. She had stepped into a fracture not just in policy, but in her own heart. And she knew, as the car ate the miles, that some fractures heal by being reopened. They drove until the city thinned and the map of streetlights smudged into fields. The car hummed like a living thing between them, an engine of conspiracy. Elena watched the darkness and thought of the coin's light, a fragile compass gone missing, and of Cairo's face as the dart found her. She had promised herself a witness, and now the witness was a fissure she could no longer ignore. "We need a beachhead," Maya said, voice low, practical. "Somewhere to sort what we have where Alvarez can't reach us for a few hours." Elena nodded. Her fingers found the scar in her pocket again and pressed, as if by pressure she could coax memory to bloom. "I know a safe house," she said, "off-grid. I signed out kits for a field survey last month. It's down by the old coastal labs, the ones they decommissioned after the first containment failures. Sparse, but it has comms and sample freezers." Maya let out a breath that was half relief. "Good. We lay low, we comb the logs, and then—" she hesitated. "We find Cairo." Elena's chest constricted at the name. There was a mingling of hope and the knowledge that hope could be the cruelest engine. She knew what tracking an exile would mean. Crossing lines Cairo had risked leaving, possibly running into the colors, possibly walking into a trap set by the director. She also knew the ache of unfinished tenderness, the way Cairo had steadied her on the cliff, the way his hand had felt like permission. She had woken with his plea in her mind. To find him might mean forgiveness, or it might mean a reckoning she could not survive. They reached the safe house as dawn bruised the edges of the sea. It was small and smelling of damp wood. Inside, Elena spread the stolen logs across a battered table. The room felt like a theater where the actors had forgotten their lines, and only the scenery remained. Maya booted up an old satellite uplink while Elena read the coalition timestamps again. There were patterns, ports, small clinics, whispers of barges loaded not with cargo, but with people. A sound at the window made them both freeze. Elena moved before thought, muscles remembering training, and found a silhouette pressed against the latticed glass. Cairo. He pushed the window up with the cautious reverence of a man who knew how fragile doors could be. Moonlight pooled along his jaw. He wore exile like a second skin, worn, defiant, luminous in the places he had been pierced. "Elena," he said. His voice had that soft, foreign cadence that had first unsettled her and then steadied her nights. "I couldn't risk an open channel." Her body answered before her mind could catalog danger. She stepped forward, and he took her hands in both of his. They were warm, and his palms had a faint tack of salt and machine oil. For a long, suspended breath, the world narrowed to the pressure between them. "You were sedated," he said. "They took something. They thought taking would make you quiet." She tasted the injustice like iron. "They did," she said. "They called it stabilization." Cairo's face broke then, sorrow folding into a kind of ferocious tenderness. "I tried to stop them," he confessed. "I pulled what I could from the operation logs, but the colors have reach, even my people fear. They targeted you because of what you can hold. Elena, they want to harvest the ways humans remember. They will weaponize it." His hands tightened. "There is a chance to stop the colors plan tonight, but it will cost us. The 10th site, the vault, stores a catalyst. It amplifies memory, but also forgives it. The coalition wanted to use it as a reset. If the colors get to it, they will write a new past for your species. Elena's throat worked. How do we stop them? Cairo's eyes had gone distant, as if he could already see the vault's starlit maw. I can use technology to shield the vault's resonance, to make its signal unreadable. But to do that, I must interface directly. They built a failsafe. Any human presence near the vault can be overwritten to preserve species lines. The failsafe uses a neural snip to prevent hybrids' memories from binding. To redirect it, I need a living conduit who carries the imprint of the 10, someone you have been made into by exposure. He looked at her with a raw honesty that gutted her. You would be the anchor. I will take the risk of binding with you. But if we succeed, the interface may take everything that links me to you. My face, my touch. I could lose the memory of you to reroute the failsafe. The room tilted. Elena felt the decision like a physical weight. To save millions, human and alien, she might have to sever the most intimate thing she had found in months, Cairo's presence in her head, their fragile trust. The idea of loving someone into oblivion was a cruelty she had not been trained to exercise. Maya watched them with an expression that read both strategy and sorrow. "Do you trust him?" she asked Elena. The question was simple, but the answer was a map. Elena thought of his hand on her palm with the coin, of the island's voice like a language that tasted like salt, of the director's sterile lies. She thought of the archives, of women who had been turned into dossiers, of children who had never been given a name. She thought of Cairo watching her sleep, not as a predator, but as someone trying to memorize tenderness like contraband. "If I don't trust him," she said quietly, "then what am I saving?" Cairo cupped her face then, and the movement was not a diplomatic gesture, but a human one, reverent and desperate. "Then let me risk forgetting you for everyone else to remember," he whispered. She saw the choice laid bare, a life that clung to memory and made a private war against power, or a sacrifice that might sever the tether between them so the world could learn what it had lost and choose differently. Elena felt the scope of what love could demand, a deliberate amputation for.